Okay, that's good to know. All right.
There, you're recording.
I just want to reiterate a little bit about what I was talking about last week about how the Gospels were formed. Something happened here. Okay. When Jesus was conducting his ministry, it was a pre-literal time. Very few people could read and write. It was expensive for one thing, but they just hadn't learned. And so they depended upon their memories as a way of conveying information, and they kind of nurtured that capacity to be able to do that. And it was the role of disciples who were following a teacher to memorize what was being said. And if the teacher was a good teacher, that teacher would help with that by teaching in memorable ways. Parables is an example of that, stories you can remember, or repetitive short sayings, or a hyperbole, which is exaggeration for the sake of effect. So you got logs in people's eyes and mountains which are moving by prayer and all those kinds of things, so that people could remember what was said. So the people who are following Jesus are committed to doing this. After his death and resurrection, they spread out and start sharing the stories. And the people who heard the stories would try to remember them also. But in the course of those, in the composition of those audiences, there would be folks who could write. And so they would probably start writing down some of those stories, and they would be circulating around. And eventually, as we know, clever Mark, somewhere we think around 70, took some of those stories and put them into narrative form. And we get from the first part of Luke a clear idea that he's doing the same thing. Here's the beginning. Since many have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those from whom the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the truth concerning the things about which we have been instructed. Now notice that he's talking about many people who have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events. And one of those people who set down an orderly account is Mark. And Luke knows about Mark and has incorporated Mark into his gospel. And we know that because sometimes we can get word for word Mark in Luke, and we certainly get the flow that Mark had of his narrative. And so Mark is an account. But there are also other accounts out there, and Luke has all sorts of other information which he has included in his gospel. And those are the recollections which we have for our edification. And they were compiled for the edification of most excellent Theophilus. Now, Theophilus means loved by God. Theo, God, Phileus is love. And it was not an uncommon name by that in that time, but it may have been the name also of, may have been a convenient name, because this gospel is designed for all those people who love God and want to be loved by God and want to grow in that. Now notice how the word excellent appears before Theophilus, which means that Theophilus is probably a person of some distinction in the Roman culture, and has that appellation in front of his name as a way of acknowledging that. So Luke is writing to a Roman Gentile who is interested in the Jewish tradition. And so that is kind of his target audience. And we can see that that's a target audience in part because he is very clear about using Greek in his gospel. For example, he never refers to Jesus as rabbi, which is a Jewish term. He always refers to Jesus by the Greek term, which means master. And he's writing for a Gentile population. Now, the concern that the Gentiles had often was, is this new Christian faith just kind of a cult like Judaism, which I have to do odd things like get circumcised and what all to follow? Or is this a faith which applies to folks like us, like people raised in the Greek culture? And so part of what Luke is doing is he's trying to convince the people that are reading his gospel that the Christian faith is a worldwide religion, is designed to incorporate everybody and to appeal not just to Jewish people, but also to interested Gentiles. Oops, I guess I should have gotten rid of my underlinings there. You're going to be talking about me even more, aren't you? There we go. Let's get rid of that. Okay. All right. Oops, didn't do that. You know, the sad thing about this is that this actually is being recorded. I'm going to be held up for public ignominy because I can't do that. Well, boy, this is really, okay, now we'll clear that. Clear all drawings. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm struggling. Okay, now I can't get it to go back. Okay. There we go. All right. So Luke is emphasizing the inclusion of non-Jews. And we get a sense of that from how he includes the Samaritans in his gospel. You know, I have a story of the Good Samaritan, the story of the 10 people, lepers who were healed. It's only a Samaritan comes back. Well, Samaritans were an excluded class in Jewish culture. But here Luke is making it very clear in Jesus' ministry, as he understands it, that Samaritans and all people were included. There is a passage in Mark which is kind of embarrassing. It's when Jesus goes up to the Syrophoenician area and talks with this Syrophoenician woman. She's non-Jewish, but she's looking for a healing. And he says, well, I've come to the Jewish people, and it's not right to give the Jewish food to the dogs. Well, it's an uncomfortable passage because dogs is a really pejorative term. It's quite an insult. And here's Jesus using it in reference to this non-Jewish Syrophoenician woman. Well, Luke excludes that from Mark. He has 85% of Mark, but he excludes that because he doesn't want to have that kind of message going out to the people who think that they might be excluded from what Jesus' ministry was. Only Matthew and Luke, for example, have a genealogy. Well, Matthew, and later on we'll discover that next week, is appealing to a Hebrew audience. He starts his genealogy with Abraham. Let's make it real clear. That's the lineage from which Jesus comes. Luke starts his genealogy from Adam. He goes way back to the beginning. And so it is a universal gospel that Luke is proclaiming here. Now, who wrote this gospel? Well, tradition has it that it was the traveling companion of Paul, Luke the physician, and Paul refers to him in Colossians. Luke, our dear doctor, and Demas send you their greetings. And Luke is also mentioned in Philemon and 2 Timothy. Well, adding support to it being an eyewitness is the Acts of the Apostles, which was also written by Luke in addition to the gospel. And about halfway through the Acts to the Apostles, the narrative of Paul's travels switches from third person to first person. So instead of they went there, it's we went there. So whoever is writing Luke is writing to a certain extent from firsthand knowledge. And we also look at the quality of the writing, and the Gospel of Luke contains some of the best Greek in the New Testament. So whoever wrote it was a highly educated person, which would fit with the physician kind of concept. Irenaeus, who was Bishop of Lyons around 178 AD, wrote, Luke, the companion of Paul, is the author of the gospel. So tradition has it that it was this doctor. Now there's some controversy about that because the account of Paul's travels in Luke.
No, look up there.
Hi, Jamie. Welcome. You may need to mute your.
We probably want to mute ourselves, though.
The account of Paul's travels in Luke are not quite the same as the account that Paul gives in his own letters. So there's some wondering about, well, how does that square? But whoever wrote the gospel, traditional or not, we have the fullest account of Jesus' ministry, and it contains some of the best loved passages of Scripture. The Gospels were probably written, most authorities say, around 85, somewhere from 80 to 90 AD, sometime after Mark. Give 10 years so Mark's Gospel could circulate around enough that Luke would be aware of it. And so it's kind of the mid first century when it comes into existence. Now, major themes of Luke. And since Luke is using Mark, one of the ways of being able to discern the major themes is to compare how Luke might modify or add to or take away from the Gospel of Mark. And I want to have an exercise to do that, if I may. And this requires some volunteers. In fact, I think we have about a dozen or so maybe online right now. And so I need to have about 3 people each volunteer to look up these passages. So do I have 3 volunteers who will look up Luke 3:21 to 22?
We will.
Yay, you and 2 others. Luke, how about Luke 6:12 to 13? 3 volunteers?
Sure.
Okay. Luke 8:19, 3 volunteers?
Yes.
And Luke 9:28 to 29, 3 volunteers. Great, very good. Now you're going to be using different translations, I'm aware of that. And that's not going to be important, because what I want to try to illustrate is that there are some concepts, not phraseology, but concepts, which Luke adds to Mark. And we'll have perhaps an example of that one. Okay. Are you just about ready?
We are.
Okay. Yep. The first one is Luke 3:21 through 22. And this is the baptism of Jesus. Now I'm going to read what Mark has.
Okay.
And what I want you to do is to look and see if there's any concept which Luke adds
Get the
in
sound.
comparison with Mark. Now don't tell me what it is, just hear this reading and look at what you're looking at and see if you can identify a different concept. And here's Mark's version of this. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased." Okay. Now the next one is 6:12 through 13. This is going up and getting ready for his ministry before he calls the disciples. Take a look at that in Luke. See if there's a concept which Luke has added, because here's Mark. He went up the mountain and called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles. Okay, here's Luke 8 through 19, and here's the Markan version of that. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And here's the last one, which is the Transfiguration. And as you look at the Lucan version, here's the Markan. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. Okay, now, did any of you in those 4 verses see a concept which was included in Luke that was not included in the Mark passages that I read?
Yes.
What?
In the 6:12 through 13, the part I think it was missing was he spent the night praying.
Okay.
Also, on that one, he used the word apostles rather than disciples, and disciples is used in Luke.
Okay.
In 3:21, the difference was, he said, Mark said he was coming out of the water and the heavens opened. In Luke, it is as he was praying, or
Okay, okay. Another passage. How about the last one, the transfiguration?
Looks like in Luke, he's praying again,
Okay.
that he wasn't in Mark.
In all four of those passages, and there are more, I'm just giving you four. What Luke does is he adds prayer. In those major transition times where Jesus calls his disciples, the transfiguration, when he's going to be baptized, when he's going to be confronting the Pharisees, all of those occasions he's praying. It's very important for Luke to point out the importance of prayer as undergirding Jesus' ministry. In fact, Luke can sometimes be seen as the prayer gospel because that's a major theme for him, and he wants that to be a major theme for us as we're looking at our own ministries. Now, there are a bunch of other major themes in, let's see, let me get that changed. Hello. There we go. There are other major themes in the Gospel of Luke, and I want to get at them through going through one of the hymns that Luke incorporates. And there are 5 hymns which are found in Luke that are unique to him. One, of course, is the Ave Maria, and there's the Benedictus, blessed be the Lord. There's the Gloria in Excelsis, which is the announcement of the birth of Jesus. There's the Nunc Dimittis, which occurs in the temple. But then, of course, there's the Magnificat, the hymn. E. Stanley Jones, the great Methodist missionary, said that the Magnificat is the most revolutionary document in the world. And so I'd like to suggest a group exercise, and if I'm lucky, I can divide us into groups. And the group exercise is this. Take a look at the Magnificat. And then as you read the hymn, ask yourself, why would Jones have said this is such a revolutionary document?
Where would we find the Magnificat?
Magnificat is going to be found in chapter 1, 46 to 55. Chapter 1, 46 to 55. And as you read that hymn, ponder this question. What major themes of Luke does the Magnificat contain? You've hopefully had a chance to read Luke in advance of this class, or at least sometime in your journey. But as you ponder Luke, what are some of the major emphases which Luke has that the Magnificat contains, forecasts? So we're going to use the Magnificat as a jumping off point into some of the major themes of Luke. Okay, now we're going to go to some groups. Are we? Where's that down there? Well, let's see here. Participants. No. Okay. I'm not seeing where it allows me to go to groups.
What? One?
46 to 55.
Mary's song of praise.
Oh. Huh. Okay. Breakout rooms. Okay, here we go. Let's go with 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go with 4 breakout rooms. So look at the Magnificat and see what the major themes are. We're going to give about 10 minutes to this. Okay.
Well, we're not gonna be able to hear them though.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, we can't hear them.
Let's see.
Well, I guess we could through the phone.
Can you hear him? Did you join the breakout? You gotta join the breakout session now.
Or if Jamie knows to come back.
He had the same thing on the,
Okay.
it has to be on their phone or something.
Yeah, Jamie just said they started on the computer. So they have one that's Waukee UMC, and then they went to the phone.
That's what's happened. Okay.
Yeah, so Jamie is the one that they actually talk through.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were in our breakout, but we never ever got their voice. I don't know why.
Yeah,
Oops.
we got it in ours, so yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh,
Yeah, we
Oh,
had
cool.
but we were on the screen.
Yeah, he was on our screen.
Hey,
What?
cut us off earlier. Sorry.
input, so Flora is with them.
Oh,
I don't feel so bad about being confused about technology now.
no, you have.
You have every right to be confused right now.
Do we have our group back here? Let's see. How we doing here? Yeah, it looks like we're doing pretty well. Okay, what are some of the major themes in the Magnificat that you sense are also going to be played out in the gospel as a whole?
Certainly the looking out for the downtrodden or the low of life. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Looking at the underdog. Sure enough.
Yep.
As well as bringing down the powerful.
Bringing down the powerful. Ah, okay.
Yep.
So it isn't just raising up the poor, it's bringing down the haughty. All right.
We had fulfillment of all the prophecies.
Okay, fulfillment of prophecy.
And
We will really pick that up in Matthew. Matthew's made big on that. But Luke, of course, is going to have that because he's reporting on Jesus' ministry, and it was a prophetic fulfillment.
Praises.
Praising, worship,
Glorifying the Lord.
Sure.
Being humble.
Ah, yes, that's the bringing down the proud, the humility. St. Augustine once said there are three ways to get to heaven: humility, humility, and humility. Okay.
Yeah, and as soon as you think you're humble, you aren't. So
Yeah, isn't that
kidding?
Well, William Barclay is sometimes quoted by Jamie, and he's a source of he's a beneficial source for a lot of the pastors. He identified three what he called revolutionary elements in the Magnificat. He said there's a moral revolution, and he already picked up on this. God stretched out his mighty arm and scattered the proud with all their plans. Talked about a social revolution. God has brought down mighty kings from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. And then he called it an economic revolution, when God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away with empty hands. And I want to not deal with these three right now. I want to deal with another revolution. And that comes from the mere fact that the Magnificat was written by who?
well, it was said by Mary.
By Mary.
A young, unmarried, pregnant woman, right?
Yeah, exactly right. In Matthew, where we have another birth narrative, the nativity story is told through the eyes of Joseph. In Luke, it's told through Mary. Now this is phenomenal in light of how women were regarded in Jesus' day. And we get a taste of that by looking at how women are regarded in traditional Middle Eastern cultures even now. Women, way back in the first, in the creation narrative, were the ones who led folks astray. Can you see my illustration here? It's not an apple. It's the closest I could get for in the refrigerator. It's an orange. but who was it that ate the orange and then gave it to her half-brained husband? it was a woman who tempted poor old hapless Adam. Well, women are regarded in many cultures still as being the tempters. That's why women are dressed so modestly from head to toe, actually, in some cultures, because if men got a glimpse of them, they might be tempted to have impure thoughts. Well, women were regarded as somehow not as worthy as men in the eyes of the righteous folks. As a result, women in Jesus' day could not participate in the synagogue activities. They were not taught the law. They were not regarded as worthy for that. Men would not talk to any woman who was not related to them, part of the family, in public. That was seen unseemly, which is one of the reasons that the disciples were scandalized when they went to the well in Samaria and saw Jesus talking with this unattended woman by the well. I mean, he just didn't do that. Women were not allowed to testify in court because they were regarded as inherently untrustworthy. So you have women being second class for sure, and yet in Luke's gospel, they have almost a dominant presence. There are women all over the place. We get Elizabeth and Anna and the widow of Nain, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet at the house of Simon the Pharisee. This is in Luke. Luke has a story of Martha and Mary. And what is Mary doing? A woman who's not allowed to be taught the law? Well, she's sitting at the feet of Jesus, learning from him. And Jesus says, you've chosen the best part. When Jesus is being sent off to be crucified, it's the women of Jerusalem who are lining the way to Golgotha. And when the empty tomb is discovered, it's not one or two women, as reported in Matthew and Luke and John. It's a whole bevy of women in Luke. There are a number of them that are discovering the resurrection, which is kind of a phenomenal, maybe almost an embarrassing thing for the early Hebrew followers of Jesus. But the most important event of Jesus' life, which is the resurrection, was discovered first and witnessed to by women who are, as I said, not regarded as worthy of testimony. And so Luke at one point mentions a number of the women who are supporting Jesus. Soon afterwards, it said, Jesus went through the cities and villages proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. And then he mentions Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons were driven out. Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, which means Joanna is a person of significant means. And Susanna and many others who provided for them out of their resources. So they are kind of the support network for Jesus. So we have in the Gospel of Luke this inclusion of gender, which is highly unusual in Hebrew tradition and actually in the cultures of the ancient Middle East. Now, because of Mary's standing and because of the Magnificat, in which she acknowledges that she's going to be blessed, she has in fact had that blessed status in the history of the church, and particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, where she is venerated. And that means that for the Roman Catholic Church, they have a significant advantage, in my opinion, over the Protestant churches, because they have a dominant female image for worship and fealty. Protestants don't have that kind of clear female presence in their devotional tradition. And it's an advantage, in my opinion, for the Catholic Church. And all this comes from Luke. That's the origin of it. So you mentioned in your looking at some major themes, the concern for the disadvantage. And that's captured, at least in Barclay's understanding, by that phrase, God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away with empty hands. That's an economic revolution. Luke is the gospel for people who are on the outside, for the poor, for the rejects, for the sinners. In fact, when Jesus is announcing his ministry at the very beginning and goes to his hometown, which doesn't receive him very well, he chooses a passage which will essentially introduce him to his hometown folks. And the one he chooses comes from Isaiah, and here it is. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has chosen me to bring good news to the poor. sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed, and to announce that the time has come when the Lord will save his people. So you have the poor and the oppressed and the blind and the people who are on the bottom tier, who are the focus of his ministry as he uses Isaiah to capture that. And later, when John the Baptist sends some disciples to Jesus saying, are you the one that's going to come? And, let's be clear about this. Jesus says, well, to the people who came from John, go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them. So the very evidence that he is the one sent by God to culminate God's actions here on earth are the fact that all of these people who are down and out are being raised up and helped. It is the focus on the people who are most in need. And so Luke alone tells us about people like the Good Samaritan, who is the example of a neighbor by helping somebody who really needed to be helped. And it's a Samaritan, nevertheless. He tells us about the prodigal son, comes from Luke alone, of course. A person who's embarrassed the family by demanding that his father give him the inheritance, which is as good as saying to his father, I wish you were dead, which was a huge scandal in that day. But nevertheless, he's welcomed back, no matter what he did. Zacchaeus, that's found in Luke alone. The quizzling tax collector, who everybody hates a tax collector no matter what. Back in the day, they hated them because they were not only taking money, which they shouldn't have, because they were generally a bunch of thieves, but because they were working for the Romans. That was an insult to injury. Well, he's the person that Jesus is going to eat with, which back in those days, of course, was a sign of deep fellowship. I'm going to hang out with a Roman tax collector who everybody generally regarded as a fraud and a cheat. I mean, the chief tax collector. And then there's the penitent thief on the cross that's found only in Luke. The person who says, why are you giving the other person on the cross? Why are you giving Jesus a hard time? We're getting what we deserve. And Jesus says, you're going to be with me in heaven this day. At the very end of his life, welcoming aboard somebody who was being crucified as a thief. So Luke is a gospel which is reaching out to those people that everybody else would walk by gladly and avoid. Barclay talks also about the social revolution. God has brought down mighty kings from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. There's a phrase which is sometimes applied to the Gospel of Luke, which is called Christian reversal. That is, Jesus, not only are the poor being lifted up, but the people who have been particularly fortunate in life are being also brought down. And I think pride has a lot to do with that, as well as just kind of a basic equality or fairness, that people who have had it really well ought to be kind of experiencing what people have not have had to do. And we find that in the Beatitudes that Luke has. Matthew has Beatitudes, of course, we know that in the Sermon on the Mount, but Luke also has some Beatitudes, and they're similar in part to Matthew. And here's a listing of the ones that we find in Luke 6. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. Now, I've been comparing Luke with Mark primarily, but I want to also do a comparison with Matthew, because here's the comparable ones for Matthew. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God, heaven. Do you see the difference there? Matthew has spiritualized it. For Luke, it's the dirt poor. For Matthew, It's the poor in spirit. Or the next one, blessed are you who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Again, there's a spiritualization going on. Luke has, I'm just talking about the people whose bellies are empty. But Matthew's talking about hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Blessed are you who weep now, according to Luke. For Matthew, it's blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons for weeping other than the fact that you lost somebody and you're mourning. You're weeping when you can't have food to feed your kids. So Luke is talking about all those people who are just really sorrowful about life. And then you have the blessings which go on here. So Luke is a person who's looking at the tangible, physical, material needs of people and seeing God being concerned about that. And then we get to the reversal. And those are the woes, which are also found in Luke, along with the Beatitudes. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what the ancestors did to the false prophets. It's not just raising up, but it's bringing down. Now the classic example of that in terms of parables is the poor man and is the rich man and Lazarus. And you remember this story perhaps. You have a person who's really in terrible shape. He has sores all over him and the dogs are licking his sores, mercy me. And there's this rich person, just kind of passes him by. Now, the rich person is not giving him a kick every time he passes him by any means. Apparently, a rich person just doesn't notice it. Well, they die. And the rich person goes down. And Lazarus goes up into the bosom of Abraham. And so Lazarus, or the rich man, Dives is sometimes the name given to him, sees Abraham up there with Lazarus, and asks Abraham if he'll send Lazarus just to give him a little bit of water. Well, in the eyes of the rich man, Lazarus is still kind of a lackey. Go get the water. And Abraham says to him, there's a gap between us. I can't do that. And besides, child, remember that during your lifetime, you received your good things. And Lazarus in manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. You see the reversal, the flip, where you have Luke saying this is going to even out. One way or another, this is going to even out. And so pay attention to that. When you're dealing with the disparity that you are dealing with in life. This is not the way God wants it. This is a good message for us because we're living in a time of increasing material disparity in the world and certainly in our country in terms of income and assets. And Luke is saying, hey, you need to look at this. Now, I want to acknowledge that this is not comfortable teaching for us rich people. But I want you to also sense the impact of this. When I was doing some research for this class, I came upon a monograph by a professor in the Netherlands. He's a professor emeritus of theology who has developed a substantial reputation as an expert on ancient cultures. And in this monograph, which was entitled How the Poor Became Blessed, he wrote about the way that poor people were looked upon in Greco-Roman culture. And I copied or got some or downloaded some of the parts of his monograph. And I'm just going to read this to you. This would probably take me about 3 minutes. But this is how the poor were regarded in that Greco-Roman culture. In Greco-Roman culture, the well-to-do weren't expected to support and help the poor. And while generosity was praised as a virtue, the poor were never signaled out as its object. It was always directed to humans in general, provided that they deserved it. When Greeks did speak about the joy of giving to others, it had nothing to do with altruism, but only with the desired effects of giving, namely honor, prestige, fame, and status. Honor is the driving motive behind Greek beneficence. And for that reason, generosity was not directed towards the poor, but to fellow humans in general, especially those from whom one could reasonably expect a gift in return. These were the, quote, worthy ones, because they acknowledged and respected the principle of reciprocity, which is quid pro quo, one of the pillars of ancient social life, which was simply stated by the poet Hesiod around 700 BC, quote, give to him who gives, but do not give to him who does not give in return. The pervasive view was that a donor should be reimbursed one way or another, preferably with a gift greater than the donor given. Religion was not much help for the poor. They simply weren't the favorites of the gods. It was rather the rich who were seen as the favorites of the divine world, their wealth being the visible proof of that favor. The poor could not pray for help from the gods because they were poor, for their poverty was a disadvantage in their contact with the gods. This was the implication of the common belief that the poor were morally inferior to the rich. They were often regarded as more readily inclined to do evil. For that reason, their poverty was commonly seen as their own fault, because they committed theft more often. No wonder they were not seen as people deserving of health, and that no organized charity developed in ancient Greece or Rome. All this applies to the ancient Romans no less than the Greeks. When a Roman is generous towards others, it is not because they are poor, but because he expects to get something in return, and because it confers honor and status upon him. Okay, that's the way the culture, the dominant culture, was in the Greco-Roman world. Now compare that with Luke and how he impresses upon us the ministry of Jesus. And one example is Jesus is at a table eating with some wealthy people. And he says to the one who invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteousness of the righteous. Now get that, they cannot pay you. Don't invite, in case you may invite you, and you would be repaid. In Greco-Roman culture, that was the deal. You wanted to be repaid, or you wanted to be seen as a generous person that everybody else would admire. Here, Jesus is saying the fact that they can't repay you is the dominant motivation. These people are so bereft that there's no way they can do that. But it's God who sees them, and God is going to make this right. Well, we get all of this, which changed culture essentially from our Jewish Christian tradition. The Jews who understood that there was a God who was concerned about the widow and the orphan and the underdog, and then Gospels like Luke, especially Luke, who impress upon us that this is part of the Christian understanding also, that we are to behave in a way which helps those people most in need. Okay, that is those dominant themes of including people who are on the outs, whether it's of gender or economic or social status, themes of prayer, all of that is encased in this gospel, which has had, I suspect, more people fall in love with it than any of the others. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. And we actually have a whole 2 minutes. Any comments? Okay, you're dumbfounded.
Actually, I had a comment, Bob.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Luke was saying, like he started out, he was talking to the Greeks, the non-Jews, and saying, well, some of this stuff the Jews are doing, you don't have to worry about, you know, all the food laws and stuff like that, but they do have some good ideas about this giving to the poor and lifting up the poor. Is that kind of the Cliff Notes version?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of capturing it. For example, there's this whole deal in Mark about Corazon, you know, about whether you can devote some things to God, and as a result, you can get out of obeying eating laws. You know, Luke doesn't include some of that.
Yeah.
It is just too esoteric for a Greek and Roman audience. But he is really impressed upon how the long-term historic Jewish and Christian understanding of a God who is righteous and compassionate and caring for the underdog is something that the Greeks and the Romans better start learning about.
I need to understand that.
Yeah, yeah. And so it really is a effort to move that culture in a very different direction. And it did. We're here now with things like the Salvation Army, as Jamie mentioned, because we think that our faith is calling us to do that.
Well, I speak for myself, but I doubt if many of us on this call can trace our roots back to Israel. You know, our roots are in Europe.
Mm.
So this is who he was talking to was our ancestors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, good to see you.
Next week is,
We will next week talk about the most important gospel for the Roman Catholic Church,
Which is.
Matthew.
I like that little voice in your background, Bob.
Pardon me? Yeah.
I like that little voice in your background.
Yeah. Where do we find the Magnificat? Oh, well, it's in Luke.
It's like that angel on our shoulder. Sounds like it looks like.
Well,
Thanks, Bob.
you're sure enough.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Everybody have a good week.
Have a great day.